So there we go. It's recording now. Great. Does anyone have any other norms that they would like to add to this call? So please contribute, use the chat function as we go along. If you prefer to verbalize your thoughts, you may do that as well. And I'm now recording this just so other people can also access the discussions. Sound good?
Lovely.
Wonderful. Okay, so what is the session about today? As you all know, you all signed up to it. We're here to talk about personality traits and to think about gaining a better understanding of ourselves and how we can then use that information to relate to those around us. So hopefully by the end of this call, you will have an enhanced understanding of your personality strengths and maybe some of the limitations that come with that. What that means to you as a professional in your role as teachers in the classroom or as a colleague within school or someone on the Teach First program. And then you'll have an opportunity to begin to critically reflect on the implications of that in relation to your professional relationships. Sorry, I'm not very good at this screen changing thing. I don't know what people can see on their screen right now.
We can see your PowerPoint with the notes underneath and it's perfectly readable, so it's fine as it is.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Amel. Okay, so yeah, the agenda of the session. So we're following this flow. We're going to start with some quick introductions. We're going to be talking about the MBTI today, so it'll be interesting to hear how many of you have come across this before or not. And then there'll be some time at the end for some feedback as well and questions. So let's begin by thinking about the why behind the session. Why are we here? Why are we talking about this? Why is it important? Any takers or any thoughts? I may call on people from time to time if it's a bit quiet. I hope that's okay. Vicky?
Sorry, have I unmuted myself now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. I think it's sort of being about self-aware, so then you know how best to sort of manage yourself in the classroom and how best to manage other people as well, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So yeah, understanding ourselves, how that might apply to us when we're in the classroom. Any other thoughts? Katie?
I typed in the comments, but basically
sorry.
The same thing.
I'm struggling to look at the comments in the chat and the screen at the same time. So apologies if you are doing, if you're typing as well. Okay, Katie. Yep. So it allows you to be the best version of yourself. Yep. Helpful if you're a leader. Useful for managing teams.
Sorry, Rahila, I've just interrupted you. I think like from a team perspective, we do this a lot at Teach First, and it's really helpful in ensuring that the team works well together smoothly and that we know where to go to draw on strengths. If we need support with a particular thing, we know which people are going to be good at certain kinds of tasks, etc. And also helps with our own self-awareness of what we might bring and like grate on people as well, which is like really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Amel. Yeah, so essentially, I mean, our personalities are what drive our behavior, and we all have natural preferences, whether we're aware of it or not, in terms of how we like to do things. And once we have that understanding then of what our preferences are and what our type is, we can then use that to help us approach our work in a more I guess, suitable way that suits our style. And in doing that also It helps you then understand what other people need from you, how they might like to interact, how they might like to communicate, how they make decisions, how they gather information, how they approach problems, and that sort of thing. It's also useful when you're thinking about careers and jobs. So, for example, you could be looking at opportunities, what opportunities are out there that suit your strengths, or what opportunities are out there that you might find challenging because it doesn't match your natural preferences. So it's really helpful in that sense as well. And of course, when it comes to teaching and learning, knowing and understanding your students and what their strengths are is absolutely essential. So yeah, it essentially helps us relate to others better. So that's kind of the why behind it. So are any of you familiar with MBTI? Have you come across this before anywhere? Do you know what it is?
We've done like personality tests with Teach First before, but I've not done anything like that before.
Okay, great. Isaac, we got obsessed with it at uni. Great, so you can help me out as we go along. Any psychology graduates on the call by any chance?
No.
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, wonderful. So hopefully this is kind of new. You'll be learning something that you didn't know before, which is great. So what is MBTI? MBTI stands for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it's one of many tools that we can use, tools and frameworks that we can use to help us understand our personalities. It's by no means a perfect tool, but it is something that's quite helpful to at least get us started in thinking about and articulating what our strengths are using the language that comes with it. So the way that the MBTI came about initially, it was designed by a lady called Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers. They were really interested in the work that Carl Jung was doing on psychological types, or the theory of psychological types in the 20s. And they wanted to kind of make that more accessible and useful to people in their everyday lives. And so they came up with this, this tool, which is the MBTI tool. So what is it? It's just a framework, and it kind of helps us understand our personality preferences in 4 key areas. So those 4 key areas relate to how we gain our source of energy. So are we the kind of people that gain our energy from outside of ourselves, from being around other people, or are we the kind of people that prefer to recharge alone? It looks at how we gather information, what are our preferences in that sense. It looks at how we make decisions. So are we more thinking types or more feeling types? And I'll go into each of these in detail as we go along. And how do we relate to the external world? So are we more the judging types or are we the perceiving types? And if this is a bit unclear at the moment, it will become clearer in a minute. So it's just a consistent and structured way of us making sense of the world. If I were to ask you now to fold your arms or cross your arms over, just a little exercise, get you moving. I'm currently doing it with my left arm crossed over my right arm. If I now ask you to swap and cross your arms using the other arm, how does that feel to you? So try and do it the other way. How does it feel? It feels awful. Okay, it might feel slightly uncomfortable. So what does that tell us? It tells us that, we feel more comfortable doing things a certain way. And some things come more naturally than others. So it's the same with these 4 preferences. On the scale, in theory, we are more inclined towards one area than we are another, but that's not to say that we can't be both. And none of these are better than the other. So all types are equal, and all this is doing is just helping us to understand and appreciate our differences. So we'll look at each of these in turn as we go through. So my first question to you is, how do you like to recharge? So thinking about, upcoming weekend, you've had a busy week in school. How do you prefer to recharge? Would you prefer to stay in at home with a book, watching TV? Or would you prefer going out with your friends, going to a party, socializing, being around loads of people? What's your natural tendency? See pals, walk the dog, being away from pupils, glass of wine and music. Yeah, nice. Definitely stay in. It varies. Nice question, Katie. Okay, great. So there's a bit of variety there. So some of us like to stay in, some of us like to go out, some of us are a bit of both, and that's completely fine. So according to the MBTI framework, what this might suggest is for those of you that prefer to stay in, you might be more on the introversion, you might be more introverted, and for those that prefer to get their energy or feel re-energized by being around other people, this would suggest that you're perhaps more extroverted. You can, of course, be both. But each of us will have, when we're just being ourselves, we'll have a natural preference towards one or the other. You could be both. In some situations or some jobs, for example, it might require you to be a bit more extroverted because you have to work with lots of people. But when we talk about these two types, we're not talking about it in the typical sense that people talk about it every day. We're talking about it more from a psychological perspective. And what it means in terms of psychological theory is different to how we would typically talk about introverts and extroverts. So for example, a common stereotype would be that all introverts are just really shy people, or extroverts are really loud and annoying, which obviously is not true. I'm sure we have some extroverts on the call. So it's just understanding how we gain our energy and what helps us to re-energize. And we can each have both of those tendencies within us, but one is more comfortable than the other. In the same way as when you crossed your arms one way, it felt more comfortable than doing it the other way. It's not to say that you can't do both. You have the ability, but just one way feels more comfortable than the other. So typically, these are some characteristics of introverts and extroverts. I won't read them all out, you have them in front of you, but typically if you're an introvert, you like to be alone, you like to think before you speak, you may not like having interruptions, you prefer receiving feedback in private, you don't like being the center of attention. If you're more of an extroverted type, you might prefer being in a fast-paced environment, you like to vocalize your ideas, you might be quite talkative, but not necessarily, and that sort of thing. So does that sound familiar? Can any of you relate to that? Which are you more of in your day-to-day? Katie, you're an extrovert. Isaac, introvert. I'm an I, FYI. Which means I find doing things like this very uncomfortable. Great. So a few introverts, a few extroverts, a few bit of both. Wonderful. Okay, next exercise. Let's think about, okay, how do we actually see the world? How do we take in information? So here's a little test for you. There's an image on your screen, and I want you to think about, when you look at this image, what is it that you're actually seeing? And this is going to give us a picture of how you like to take in information. So can everyone see the picture?
Yeah.
I'd love for someone to talk. I feel like I'm talking to myself.
I can't see the picture. Which one are you talking about?
It's slide 13.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
The red butterfly stands out to me first.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Anything else? Just describe. What is it that you see?
There's then a big bee wasp type creature in the foreground facing towards me, and then there's lots of various bright colours. You can't work out much in the background because it's all quite clustered.
Okay. Anyone
It's
else?
basically just like an overgrown garden area nearby a house that's unusually full of a variety of insects.
Great. Anyone see anything different? Or have a
It's not
different
very realistic.
interpretation?
The sizes are too, like the insects are too big, if you know what I mean,
Okay.
proportionally.
Anything else?
Not to sound cheesy, but I thought of like the abundance of life.
Wonderful. So why did I ask you to do that? So what I was trying to get at, I wanted to see how many of you are more of the sensing types versus the intuitive types. So those of you that told me very concretely, this is what I see. I see a red butterfly. I see an oversized insect, whatever that might be. You're probably more of the sensing types. You're on the S scale. You see what's in front of you. You see things as they are. You pay attention to the facts, the details, and you describe things very literally. Whereas if you're more of an intuitive type, like I think, was that Lucy? Did you jump in there at the end? You might be more of an N, because you started to think about the bigger picture maybe behind that image. You were starting to draw connections between what you see and maybe what you know, or whatever prior knowledge you have of this situation. You're thinking of the different possibilities of how things might be. So that makes you more of an intuitive type. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I am an N. It's official.
Wonderful. Okay. So that was the purpose of that exercise, just to demonstrate that we can all be looking at the same picture, but what we see might be slightly different. Some of you will just see what's on the screen. You see the details, you can describe that. Others are looking at the bigger picture. Like someone started to talk about, oh, it's, maybe it's an old house and whatever it was that you said. I can't remember exactly, but you started to think about beyond what was directly in front of you. So from that, hopefully that gives you a sense of who you are. Are you more of the sensing type or more of the intuitive type? So I've described a bit of those characteristics to you already, so I won't spend too long on that. So the next thing we'll look at is, how do you like to make decisions? Are you more of a thinker or are you more of a feeler? So let's think of a scenario. Are there any, from anyone who's done the test, are there any thinkers or feelers on the call?
Is that where it says you are something by nature?
Something by nature?
So below the table of colours, it says you are something by nature. Well, basically it says I am an idealist by nature. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Okay, no worries.
I'm feeling.
You're more feeling?
Yeah, from my result from the test.
Okay, and do you know what characteristics that relates to as a feeler? So how do you as a feeler make decisions?
I don't really know. I did it a while ago.
No worries. I'm just gonna look at what people are saying. I'm half and half. Rosie, I'm a thinker. 81% feeling. Okay, so what does that actually mean? So if you're a thinker, you're the kind of person that uses logic when it comes to making decisions. You look at the facts, you look at the principles behind things. You're very analytical, and you approach problems in a very step-by-step manner. Whereas if you're more of a feeling type, doesn't mean that you don't value the details, but you're more concerned about the impact of things on other people. You value harmony with the people around you. And so whenever you're making a decision, you don't just make a decision based on it being logical. You're thinking about the impact on those around you. Does anyone recognize that in themselves or in any people that they may know or work with?
Yeah, and this definitely relates to me, and in some ways it actually rings true with linking it to the classroom. Because, for example, like this is probably quite poor behaviour management, but I would rather almost like apologise to the children, not always say like, oh, I was wrong, but like, I'm sorry for the situation that happened, because I'm like, oh, I'm worried about their feelings, even though like I literally did nothing wrong. It was literally 100% the kids, but not that always happens, but I'd rather like build up that relationship and be like, let's not worry so much about the facts that happened and just try and get to some kind of harmony so that we can move on. Even though I have been told before, like, you should never apologise unless you've done something wrong. So I don't know if that's bad practice, but just try to get harmony with the children, basically.
Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Like, do you recognize yourself as being strongly one or the other, or maybe a bit of both?
I think well, I'm not sure. There was a question on the test where it asked how you greet people. And when I'm in school, I feel like I become really quite a bit standoffish and quite, not standoffish, but very professional.
Yeah.
Whereas in other situations and with the kids in school, I'm much more like greet them with feeling, because I'm like genuinely happy to see them, or maybe not so happy.
Which one comes more naturally to you?
Definitely feeling. I feel like very awkward when I have to be professional.
Yeah. So that's a really great point there, because like I said before, we may naturally lean towards one preference more so than the other, but the environments that we're in may require us to draw on the other side that may not come as naturally to us. For example, the situation that you've described. You may be in a job that requires you to be really analytical and really matter of fact and really structured and step by step in how you do things. But when you're outside of work, you may approach things very differently. And that's okay, but we just need to be aware of that and also just recognize what impact that has on us and how different environments can also cause us to shift.
Yeah.
Any other reflections on that one? Okay, we'll move on. So the last pair looks at how we relate to the external world. So are we more the judging type, or are we more the perceptive type? Now, this isn't judgy in the sense of being judgmental in a negative sense. Again, it has a slightly different meaning. But the scenario that I wanted you to think about for this was in relation to deadlines. So for those of you that are on the call, when it comes to your deadlines and things that you need to get done, how do you typically approach that? Are you very planned and organized and know what you need to get done and just do it? Or are you the kind of person that's like, yeah, I know I have that deadline coming up, but I'll get to it eventually, and then there's a last minute flurry at the end?
think
I'm
it's
definitely the one, like, organised with everything, and even things that should be fun, I still have a plan to go with that activity, which is less fun probably, but I just can't help myself.
I don't think I've ever done anything without a last minute rush at the end, which is very, very stressful.
Uh-huh.
And I want to be different, but it's hard.
Okay. I'm a bit like that too. I think I do like to plan things, but not all the time. I think I had a conversation with Lucy earlier, and she was saying in work, she's very planned and organized and has a plan for everything. But when she's at home, if she's going on holiday, she doesn't like to have a plan. She likes to just go with the flow. Was that an accurate description, Missy?
It's very true. So you can all feel confident that your conference weekends are going to be superb this year.
So that would mean Lucy, for example, would be the perceiving type, dare I say, when it comes to holidays, but more of a judger when she's at work.
Yeah, so I scored 52% actually, which I guess is pretty central.
Interesting. So you're a bit borderline there. Anyone else think that they're a mix of both?
Yeah, I'm quite a mix of both, I think. Especially, I think there's quite a work and home distinction where I try to be sort of quite organised at work, and sometimes there's a bit of a mad flurry, but at home it caters much more to the latter, I suppose.
Okay, great. So if I were to ask people, what are you doing this weekend? How many of you have a very clear plan? You know exactly what you're doing. You've got the whole day scheduled out.
I usually have a very fuzzy structure of what I'm going to do, and usually meet those plans an hour late.
I normally have a rough plan of work I'm going to get done and then never get as much done as I wanted to.
And when you don't have a plan, how does that make you feel?
Somewhat uncomfortable. I would rather have a rough idea of what we're doing. Also, it means that there's something to look forward to at the weekend, which I think is quite important, like linking back to teaching. I think it's really important to schedule something fun and social, or not social if you're an introvert, something fun at the weekend so that you've got something to look forward to.
Yeah, great. And with that, I mean, you know, introverts may prefer to recharge by being on their own, but that doesn't mean that necessarily that they don't want to be social. It just might be that they prefer, rather than being with large groups of people, they may prefer just hanging out with like one or two close friends, for example, which, yeah, again, there's no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just being aware of what comes naturally to us. So we know how to then either manage our energy if we're in situations, for example, in a classroom situation or in a school situation. If you're an introverted type and it's a very fast-paced environment where things are constantly changing and there's stimulation coming from lots of different places, and obviously you're around kids the whole day, that can be quite draining. So knowing that about yourself means you can then plan maybe moments in your day where you can find solitary moments to recharge to help you get through. And the same for your students. Think about it from their perspective. If they're in a class full of really loud people and they're more of the introverted type, what impact is that having on them and their learning as well? Okay, so moving on. So we've talked a bit about that. So there's the judging types, the perceiving types. If you're more of the perceiving type, you don't mind spontaneity. If plans change, you don't freak out. You just kind of go with the flow, and that's kind of how you work. So when you put all these different types together, it forms different combinations of preferences, I suppose. So on the MBTI, there are 16 distinctive personality types that these different combinations form. And I'll be sharing with you after the call the descriptions of what each of those are. Again, this isn't measuring like specific traits or abilities or character. It's merely just a reference of how you live your life, how you make decisions, how you take in information, and how you draw your energy. So I thought it would be good to see what different types we have on the call. Hopefully you all have done the test, so you know what your 4-letter type is. So if you could share that in the chat, that would be great. And I'm going to share a link with you as well to a survey, a very quick survey that we can all take, so you can so we can just see as a group visually what we all are, or what our preferences are. So I've shared the link with you now.
I think the link proved problematic for me, Rahila.
Oh no. Okay, let's try again.
It's working for me, but I'm on Skype for Business, so I don't know if that, like, I'm not joined through the app, if you know what I mean, so I'm not sure if that makes a difference.
Oh, I see. Let me share the long link and see if that works.
Yeah, perfect.
Hooray. Okay, has everyone had a chance to fill it out? I'll just try and share the results with you so you can see. Awesome. Okay, please bear with me. I'm like jumping from screen to screen. It's just driving me crazy. Sorry. Whilst I'm trying to get it up on the screen, maybe we can start discussing from what I've shared with you so far and from the test that you've done. Was there anything that surprised you? Do you agree with the descriptions of the type that you came out as? And what does this actually mean for you in your role as a teacher or a leader?
I liked my one because when you read about it, the initial summary, it says consoles are the cheerleaders of life, which I find quite funny because I am actually a cheerleader. So there you go. It seems quite accurate.
And are there any aspects of the description that you read that you think others might find challenging about you?
Challenging in what way?
See as difficult to understand, perhaps.
Oh, like as in kind of personality clashes that I might have that are different to me. Well, there's like a list of like the negative things about being apparently a console. So apparently I'm like potentially worried about my social status, can be inflexible, can be vulnerable to criticism. I don't know. I think it all depends a bit on the situation, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
I'd like to jump in here because me and Katie actually work together, and it's interesting because Katie, apart from one of the things, is the complete opposite of me.
Nice.
but we work really well together. So and I think we have been able to help each other out with different aspects of school and how we approach each first and stuff. So it is definitely useful to be working with a large variety of different types of personality.
Yeah. So what aspects of your personalities complement each other?
Last year, like because I don't know which thing it fits into, but like I'm basically a massive perfectionist, and so I spent like so much time planning lessons last year, and still spend quite a long time on it. And like Isaac would be like, "Oh, bye! I'm just going home, like just chilling in bed." And that was like quite tough for me last year at times, because I just felt like, oh man, what is Isaac doing right that I'm doing wrong? But also it was like really beneficial for me, because he was somewhat of a role model, because I could be like, right, he's been able to leave at 4, like I'm going to try and leave at 4 today. Do you know what I mean? Like if he can do it, I can do it, kind of thing. So it's beneficial to work like with people that are different personality type to you. Also, on my thing, it literally says teaching is a great career option for. So there you go. Clearly, I'm doing something right.
You're doing the right thing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So that's a nice example of how you can kind of complement each other, even though you might be completely different. It sounds like, Katie, you might be more of a sensor or a judging type.
Yeah, I am sensing and judging.
Okay, oh, brilliant. And Isaac must be more perceiving and intuitive.
Yeah, he's just way more like efficient. He'll just be like, oh, I'm going to get this done and this done and this done, and then it's done. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I could do it this way. And then I'll just like procrastinate and take ages.
Yeah. And does that cause any friction, or has that caused any friction in the past? The fact that you're more organized and he's maybe a bit more relaxed?
No, it's not organized. I just find him more efficient.
Also, KT's, it goes both ways. I tend to be quite blunt with the kids. Like, if they don't do exactly what I want when I want, I can be really stroppy with them. Whereas KT's really lovely with them and really nice to them, and I've learned a lot about that.
I wouldn't say any friction at all. I would say, not from my side anyway. I don't know, Isaac, you want to reveal something in this group chat, but not friction, more just like as I was saying before, a sense of like, okay, he's able to do it really quick, so like I want to be able to get to that point too. And like when we're doing our big portfolios, obviously like that's the big summary at the end of the year for everything, and that can be a place of quite a lot of stress, but it was nice because we were able to talk about it together, and he could show me how he'd done it, and then because he was so much more organized and ahead of the game, I was then able to actually learn from him. So it worked out really well for me that he was really organized in that.
Great, so that's a really nice example of how two opposite types can actually work really well together. That's not always the case, so it's good to be aware of that as well, because in some situations, when you're working with someone who is the opposite to you, that could potentially be a stressor or cause a bit of friction. And sometimes if you're communicating with someone who thinks differently to you, if you're very opposite to each other, sometimes you can perceive that other person in a more negative way. But that's not necessarily because they're right and you're wrong. It just means that the way you do things is just slightly different to them. And so you need to find a way to bridge that so that you're appealing to their way of thinking, for example. So in a situation where, for example, you have a head of department, if they're more detail-oriented and more of a judging type, and they just expect things to get done a certain way, and you're more of a perceiving type, you're a bit more relaxed, that can be quite stressful because you're kind of being driven by this judging energy, which could put pressure on you, and that's not how you naturally work. So good to think of that as well in a work context, like how does that play out in your relationships with others, be it colleagues or mentors or others within your school. So I don't know if you can see the results on the screen now. Can you?
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah. So this is just.
Can't see them.
Oh, you can't see. I'm sorry. I'll try and summarize. But from the group that are on the call at the moment, it seems 5 out of 8 more leaning towards introversion than extroversion. Our natural preferences are split 50-50. So we've got 50% sensors and 50% intuitive types on the call. Interestingly, a lot of us are feeling types. So 6 out of 8. We've got 2 thinking types and a lot of judging people on the call.
Rahila, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to go. The bell's just gone for all staff to be out the school, so
Okay.
I'm going to have to leave it for now.
No worries. I'll be sending all the resources, etc., so you can catch up later. If you...
Okay, thanks so much. It's been really interesting.
Thank you for joining.
Okay, all right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye, George.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm now going to try and switch back to the PowerPoint, so just bear with me for a sec. Sorry, it's a little bit fiddly, so I apologize. Yeah, so the next thing that I want us to think about for the next kind of 10 minutes or so is, now that you kind of have a sense of who you are, what your preferences are, what your natural tendencies might be, how does that relate to the people around you? So what are the things that actually stress you out? If you're more of a feeler and you're working with a thinker, what kind of things might stress you out, knowing what you know about each type? So for this, I'm going to share a link to a Padlet page. If I can, it's not letting me copy. Great. I'm going to share a link to a Padlet in the chat, and it'd be great if maybe we can split ourselves up and take one of the pairs each. So Victoria, what were you? Were you an I or an E?
Me, sorry.
Yeah.
I was an E.
You were an E. Okay. Could you look at the E then on the Padlet link that I've just shared? Were there any? Well, there were quite a few I's. Anyone want to volunteer to look at the I, the introversion bit?
Rahila, is the survey link that you've shared again there?
Oh, is it? Sorry. Why is it not copying? The joys of technology. Okay, try another way. Sorry about that. Here we go. This should work. So I'll let you just open it up before I say anything. So once you manage to open it up, you'll see a Padlet page, which is grouped into the different types. I'd just like us to think about, for a couple of minutes, what are the things that stress out each of those types? So if you're an I, for example, what are the things that stress you out? And what do you think might help you work better with someone who's more extroverted than you? So if we could split ourselves and take a different one each, if possible, that would be great. So Victoria, if you could look at the I bit, that would be great. You just click on the plus to add your notes. Rosie, I think you were, sorry, Vicky, you were an E. Rosie, you were an I. Do you mind looking at the I?
Yeah, that's fine.
Katie, were you an S or an N?
I'm an S.
You're an S. Could you look at the S?
Mhm.
Did we have any N's?
Yep.
Yep, could you look at the N's?
Yep.
And once you've done that, you'll have a free-for-all. Just look at the others that we haven't divvied out. And
Is it you just want us to type something based upon what we think, like our
Yes.
own idea?
your own
'Cause there's
ideas.
nothing to read, so
You're just,
Yeah.
sorry. You're just sharing your own ideas and your own thoughts at this point.
okay.
So we'll just take a couple of minutes to do that.
I need to remind myself what the sensing bit means.
What I'll do is I'll just share with you the descriptions if it's helpful in the chat.
Sorry, I've just got another tab open. It's fine. It's all over the internet, so.
Give you another 2 minutes on that. The introverts are probably thinking, thank goodness, thinking time. You could also think about it from the perspective of your students and what they might need and what might stress them out based on their type. Okay, shall we come together and just share some of the ideas that you've written down? Would anyone like to share?
I don't mind starting off because I was introvert. So I said,
Yeah.
one of the stresses for me, I was thinking about planning because we have to plan together sometimes at school, which can be quite difficult for me sometimes. I've said extroverts may want to discuss lots of ideas and be really creative, but that might be difficult for someone who's an introvert if they want to be quite focused and find that quite difficult. So a solution for that might be having that discussion prior to that and sort of trying to take a solution focused approach. I don't know how effective that would be, though it hasn't been effective for me in the past, but that's something that I find stressful sometimes. Yeah.
Anyone else have any suggestions of how to get around that, perhaps?
I guess the only idea for staying more solutions focused is just making sure in meetings that you have a clear agenda, a clear timekeeper or chair of the meeting, so that you achieve the things that you set out to achieve.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea. Thanks for sharing, Rosie, as well, sharing your stressor. Could we have maybe just one more person share a stressor for one of the other types?
So I wrote about judging, Mahila, and my stressors are when there isn't a plan, like on a daily basis or more long term. And there's definitely people within our team who work in a different way to me, and what helps me is just awareness that there are different ways of working, and I think through doing work with MBTI has really helped me to reflect on that. And it's quite hard to digest, actually. Some people don't operate in the same way that I do with deadlines and planning and things like that. Awareness is number one. And then reflecting, I guess, on what are the things for me which are non-negotiable that I have to kind of maintain that judging stance on, and what are the things where it would benefit from me, considering approaching things differently.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Amel. So that's definitely, I think, one that's quite good to think about in a workplace scenario. And I imagine especially in school, because there'll be loads of, for those of you in schools, deadlines and for all sorts of things. And the people who set those deadlines, you need to be aware of what kind of type they are and what's kind of driving them. And that will give you a sense of how much maybe room for, what's the word I'm looking for? How much stretch there might be when it comes to things like deadlines or not. Any other thoughts? Okay, so I'll move us on. I just wanted you to start thinking about or getting into that process of becoming more conscious and aware of what those things are that might stress you out, and also by looking at what stresses other people out, try to gain that self-awareness so that if you are working with someone who is different to you, you kind of start to develop that appreciation, like Amel said, that, you know, some people may work differently. That's not necessarily, your way is not always necessarily the right way, nor is theirs. There's no right or wrong. But how can you then adapt your approach so that you can kind of meet in the middle and be more cooperative, I suppose. So there are a lot of strategies that you can use in different situations. I'm not going to go into them in depth on the call, but I will be sharing them with you later on. Are you able to see my PowerPoint still, or what are you seeing on your screen at the moment?
Yeah, I can see the Padlet link.
Okay, perfect. So on the slides, there are tons of examples of what the different stresses are, but I won't go through them on the call. I'll leave that for you to look at on your own. And then after the call, I have some resources that I'll share with you, which looks at some of the strategies and tactics that you can use if you're working with someone who's a different type to you. So hopefully that will be of help to you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move us along. We're on the last part now, where I just want us to think a little bit further about how this applies to working with others. So we've already, some of us shared examples, like Katie and Isaac said, how they worked really well together, even though they are different types. I want you to think of a scenario that you have faced or might face in the future in your school context, where you either have to work with someone who's an opposite type to you. What is that scenario that you have in your head? What do you think the other person might be thinking of you? How might they be perceiving you? What might be some of the challenges, and how might you go about approaching it? So maybe just take a minute or two to think of a scenario within your own context. And if anyone's comfortable, if any of you extroverts who like to think out loud, if you want to verbalize it, feel free to do that as well. And if you're really stuck, I'll give you one that we can think of together. Does that make sense?
I don't have a specific scenario, but just to get the ball rolling, I do have a colleague that I really struggle to work with, and I think the crux of it is not that, like, I don't know, we can't get on. It's just that we're just clearly just very, very different people. I find him incredibly negative all the time. And he'll often, like, I don't know, just refer to like the children in such a negative way. Like, he's got this little year 7 form, and year 7s are so adorable, in my opinion anyway, and they're so cute and stuff, and he'll just kind of like moan about them and say how they're so annoying, and I'm like, oh well, they're only little year 7s, you know, and how needy they are. And I think I watched the TEDx video that you also linked as the pre-work, and I think it's just that, like, he probably finds me ridiculously annoying because I'm generally quite like energetic at work and bubbly, and so it's just not a clash, but I guess it's just a massive difference in personality. I don't really have a way to solve it. My solution is just when he's really negative, I just try to not respond at all, because if I respond, he'll just kind of like bite back. And kind of try and support his point more about why he's right. So I tend to just try and let it wash over me when he's being really negative, and then just like move on from the situation. But it's not ideal, because we should kind of be thriving together as colleagues, but I tend to just kind of avoid it is my solution at the moment. If anyone who's more introverted or feels similarly to my colleague, then feel free to give me advice. But I also feel like, because that is the trait, I can't really talk to him about it, because he would almost be negative about the fact that I've raised an issue, because he doesn't really want to converse about things. Does that make sense? It's almost like a problem within a problem that can't be solved.
Yeah. Do you think he's more introverted than extroverted?
Massively. Yeah, so much so. Like just the other day, he like referred to me as an idiot, and I was just like, oh, I don't feel like that's massively appropriate way to refer to. Like, it was to my face, so I was just like, he just meant it as like banter, but I was just like, oh, I don't think that's that nice. So I just let it wash over me, and move on, kind of thing.
Anyone have any suggestions of how they might approach that situation?
Not necessarily a solution to the problem, but I think it's always useful in these situations to explore, like, beyond the headlines. So he said he finds year 7s really annoying. I think we'd be interested to dig into that and like ask, you know, what is it that you find annoying about it, just so that you can really fully understand his perspective. So I think it's quite difficult to think about how you can address the issue if the problem is not fully understood. So I think, like, spending some time like trying to unpick that and trying to understand his perspective and sharing yours might put you in a better position to then think about the next bit, which would be like, how could you overcome that negativity?
Thank you for your suggestion. I think you're right. I shouldn't just like be like, oh well, that's a lost cause, so not even try. But I do find it very difficult, because he's often like highly introvert. He's one of those people where even if you try to make small talk, he'll give you like one word answers, and you're like, okay, you're not really giving me anything back here. Like, how can we make progress? But I guess that you saying that is a reminder to me that I should keep persevering.
Yeah, and it might be useful also just to get a better sense of, like, you know, you've narrowed it down. You think he's more of an I, but on the other characteristics, like if you're trying to share some information with him, how is he more receptive to that? So thinking about the other types on that kind of framework, if you're able to kind of gauge where he's at on the other bits, then it might help you to think about how you would approach a conversation with him in a way that makes him more receptive to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah.
Anyone else have an example they'd like to share, or just anything else that they'd like to add to the current example? Is anyone typing? No? Okay. I know it's been a long evening. Thank you so much for being patient and for persevering. We could probably talk about this stuff for hours and hours, but we don't have that time. So I guess one thing I'd just like to leave you with moving forward is just to encourage you to start to be more aware of the people around you. You've had an opportunity to think about who you are and what your strengths are, what your preferences are, but how do you identify other people's type? Not everyone is going to go and do an MBTI test, and not everyone that you interact with is going to do it. So how are you going to know what their type is? So I'd encourage you to just be more conscious of those around you. Really observe and listen to how they are communicating with other people, how they're behaving, how they're interacting. When you're in a meeting or in a staff meeting, for example, what are people saying? What are people not saying? How do they talk about various things? How do they make decisions? And that sort of thing. And that will help you to start to build a picture of where they might fit in this framework. And another way that you could also figure out what their type might be is just to ask a few questions that give you a bit of an insight into how they're thinking and noticing how they respond. So for example, if you're going to ask a question to an introvert, they may not answer straight away. You may have to give them a bit of time to think before they respond. Or you might think of a clever question that when someone responds to that will tell you whether they're more of a, for example, a sensing type or an intuitive type. In the same way that I asked you, hey, what are your plans for the weekend? Do you know what you're doing next weekend? Or in 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now? If you're the kind of person that can tell me exactly what you're doing, that suggests to me that you're the kind of person that likes to have a plan. You're very detail-oriented, you're structured. If you're like, oh, I don't know, I'll just go with the flow, that gives you another sense of how that person may like to plan. So then how do you use that information to then influence them or work better with them in that situation? Does that make sense? Silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just to wrap things up then, it'd be great just to hear from you. We've talked a lot about a few different things. What did you get out of this session? What are your key takeaways? And is there anything, well, you don't have to answer this question, but you can. What aspects of different styles do you aspire to? And how can you work on developing this? You don't have to answer that, just share anything that you'd like to share. I know it's been a long evening.
I think one of the main things is that when we got into this at university, it was very much a sort of it was a different kettle of fish to looking at it in a work situation. And I think especially in a situation where you're working with a lot of children who are still developing their personalities and their identity isn't quite as fixed as ours is. So I think it's just been interesting to approach it from that more that sort of duality of both work and home, and also to think about the children and their development.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Any other thoughts on how this was going to be useful to you in the classroom and working with your students specifically? Or any just random questions that you have?
I guess going off what Isaac just said, like somewhat as a biologist, it's interesting to me to see like, what is the science fact behind this, and at what point does it become concrete? If it is concrete, is it possible to change? What things can cause your sections to change? Should we try and influence our students to be a certain way or not to be a certain way, etc., etc. Like, I don't know. I guess at the moment I'm trying to encourage my year 11s to be a J, because I want them to be planning their revision and I want them to stick to deadlines and get things done. Is it even possible? By the time they're year 11, is it already like almost in inverted commas too late kind of thing? And if so, at what point are they still kind of sponges that we can adapt, or should we not really be adapting them? I don't know. All of those kind of rhetorical questions it raises.
Yeah. Any responses to that from anyone? Are you feeling similarly? Yeah, I think as you take this forward and as you think about it a little bit more and you start to notice these things in your students, or if you're thinking of developing these kind of traits within your students, just know again that there is no right or wrong. And for example, in this situation where you're talking about, preparing your students, there is a situation there that requires them to kind of leverage some of those traits, but that may not be natural to them. So then what's your role as a teacher in that situation? And how can you give them the strategies so that they can behave in that kind of way when the situation calls for it, given it's not their natural tendency? And how can they then maybe learn from others who are different from them? So it's not necessarily molding them permanently. It might just be, how do you support others to use or develop strategies to emulate a certain type that's more conducive to a certain situation that they're faced with. Okay, so I'll leave it there. We have 2 minutes left. I'll leave you with a quote. This was from the video, if you watched the video, the TEDx video that I shared. In that video, Scott said, if you're irritated by something someone else is doing, pause and reflect and ask yourself why. What's actually going on? Because it's more likely about you than it is about someone else. So I'll leave you with that thought to think about. And just very quickly, for those of you that joined the call, some reminders for this half-term 2, just so that you're aware. This half-term 2, you've now fulfilled one of the requirements, which is attending the webinar. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for making the time to join and contribute. The 2 other things that you need to do for this half-term deadlines, 15th of December, just setting your next half-term 2 progression framework objective. So this is the goal that you want to work on for next half-term. Yep, and then evidencing the objective that you're working towards for this half-term. So those are the 3 things that you need to do by the 15th of December. Please look at the bulletin if you aren't already. Check your junk mail just in case it's going in there if you're not receiving it, because there's a lot of information that's shared through there that's not shared anywhere else, especially in relation to opportunities that are coming up. So notable ones are the Big Class Challenge. So if you're looking at promoting post-school progression to your students, there's some packs you can download online. They're available for all age groups from early years up to Key Stage 4, and you can just download lesson plans to run with for that. More information is on the website. Innovation series, for those of you that are interested in that, there's an application deadline on the 10th of Jan and some workshops coming up next month. Socials, always fun. Socials are being planned right now. The dates are on your screen. They're also in the newsletter that went out. So have a look at that and please sign up so you can come and have some fun. And LDOs will probably be reaching out to you to share your stories. We want to know what's going on inside your classrooms, and we want to celebrate and share the great things that are happening. So please, please, please tell us what you're doing so we can share it more widely with the wider community so people can see and be inspired by what you're doing. And if you have shout outs for anyone that you're working with and you want to just, say thank you for something to someone who's been really helpful to you, please share those with us as well so we can put them in the bulletin. And that's a lot of me talking, so I'm happy to end there. I'm just going to share one final link with you. If you have 5 minutes to spare, I really, really would love your feedback on the session today. So I'm just going to pop this link into the chat and appreciate if you could just take a quick 2-3 minutes to fill that out, and then go and enjoy the rest of your evening and have a fabulous week ahead. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thanks, Rahila. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Amel.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, although that link that you just posted doesn't work.
Oh no. Okay, I will share it with you via email. If I can get the link to work at some point. But thank you very much for joining.
Thanks.
And I'll share all the resources with you so you can take it further if you want to.